more clearly than I could possibly have done with the eyes of my body. And he remains so deeply imprinted there, that although this happened to me above 26 years ago, methinks he is still as present to me now as he was then. I became so altered, and was also so astonished, that I intended to see that person no more. It did me a great deal of harm that I knew not, at the time, it was possible for one to see anything but with the eyes of the body. And the devil was careful enough to make me continue in that erroneous opinion, and to make me still believe it was impossible, and therefore that I had but fancied these things to myself, and that perhaps it might be a delusion, though I was still convinced it was God, and no delusion at all. But, because it was against my inclination, I tried to deceive myself, and as I durst not confer with any one about the matter, though greatly importuned to do it, assuring myself that there could be no evil in seeing such a person, and that there would be no loss, but rather gain by it, I returned to the same conversation, and even on some occasions to others, and for many years I took this pestilential recreation, and being once engaged in it, it seemed to me not to be so very bad as it indeed was, though sometimes I perceived clearly enough that it was not good. But yet no other conversation distracted me so much as this did, on account of the great affection I had for this person. Another time, when I was in company with the same individual, both of us saw coming towards us, and there were others also present who saw it, something in the shape of a great toad, which passed on with much greater speed than such animals usually do. I could not understand how such a filthy beast could get into the room, through that part whence it came, and even at noonday. Such a thing had never been seen there before. The effect which this appearance wrought in me seems not to have been without some mystery, and it was an event which I could never forget. O greatness of God! With how much care and pity didst Thou admonish me in so many ways, and how little was the profit I derived thereby! There was in this house a certain elderly nun, a great servant of God, and who was a relation of mine. She sometimes gave me good advice, but I not only not believed her, but I was even disgusted with her, thinking she was offended with me without cause. All this I relate here, in order that both my wickedness and the great goodness of God may be the better understood, and that it may appear how well I deserved hell for my ingratitude. And another object I also have, that if our Lord should so ordain, and should be pleased that any religious women should read this discourse, they may take warning by me. I beg of them, for the love of our Lord, that they will fly from such recreations as these, and I beseech His Majesty, that some of those whom I have deceived may be disabused. For I told them there was no harm in those things, and, being in great blindness at that time, I assured them also there was no danger, and, as I have said before, by the bad example which I gave them, I was the cause of much harm to them, though I thought I was doing no harm at all. While I was yet very infirm in those first days, before I knew how to help myself, I conceived an extreme desire to do others good, which is a very common temptation for beginners, though it happened to succeed well with me. As I loved my father very dearly, I desired he might receive the same benefit which I thought I had gained myself, by means of mental prayer, and being of opinion that in this life there was no greater blessing than to practice such kind of prayer, I began, by indirect discourses, to try all in my power that he might obtain it, and for this object I gave him some books. Being so virtuous a man, as I have already mentioned, he applied himself so diligently to this exercise, that within 5 or 6 years he advanced so much, that I blessed our Lord very much for the favor, and it gave me the greatest consolation. The troubles he endured were various and very severe, all of which he endured with much conformity to God's will. He often came to see me, and derived great comfort by speaking on holy things. But when now I was living in such distraction that I left off mental prayer, and as I saw that he still thought me to be the very same that I had been before, I was not able to endure this without undeceiving him. I had passed a year and more without prayer, thinking it was more humility in me to abstain, which was the greatest temptation I ever had, as I shall afterwards mention, for by this means I ran headlong towards my total ruin. Whereas, when I practiced prayer, if I offended God one day, I recollected myself the next, and removed myself farther from the occasion. Wherefore, as my good Father came when I was in this state, thinking that I still conversed with God, as I formerly had done, it was too much for me to see him so greatly deceived, and so I told him that I no longer used mental prayer, though I did not mention the cause. I alleged, however, my infirmities as the obstacle, for although I had recovered from my severe illness, still I always had afflictions, and very great ones too. Of late years they were not indeed so violent and painful, but they failed not still to continue in many ways. For 20 years together, in particular, I had vomitings every morning to such a degree that I could never break my fast until noon was over. Yea, and sometimes later. That I am now able to receive the Blessed Sacrament more frequently proceeds from this cause, that these vomitings come on at night before I go to bed, and then they give me much more pain, for I am obliged to hasten them by means of feathers and other things, because if I have not these vomits, the pain which I feel is extreme. But I think I am seldom or ever without many pains, and sometimes these are very sharp, especially at my heart, though still all my sickness, etc., which used to come upon me so thickly, now come only seldom. Such is the dreadful palsy and other fevers which used to attack me, so that now I often find myself in good health. But I have made so little account of these sufferings for the last 8 years, that sometimes I am even glad I have them, thinking that our Lord may be somewhat served thereby. As my Father believed that this was the cause of my omission, and as he never told an untruth himself, he had no reason to think but that I told the truth, considering on what subject I was then discoursing with him. And that he might believe me the more, I told him also that I had enough to do to be able to assist in the choir, though I saw clearly this was not a sufficient excuse to make me omit such a practice, since for such an action there is no need of corporeal strength, but only of love and habit, because our Lord will always give us an opportunity, if we ourselves have the will and inclination. I say always, because, though infirmities and other causes may sometimes hinder one from spending many hours in solitude, yet we shall have some other times wherein we may have health enough for being in solitude, and even during the same sickness. For, on such occasions, the best prayer may be made, since it is the soul which loves, by offering up our pains to God, by remembering for whose sake they are endured, and by conforming ourselves to His will, and in 1,000 other ways that may offer themselves. Thus we may exercise our love, for there is no necessity either for one to be in solitude or to use mental prayer at all. If we take a little care, we may obtain great blessings, even when our Lord takes away from us opportunities for prayer, by sending us sickness. And I myself found this to be true, as long as I kept my conscience pure. But my Father, through the opinion which he had of me, and the love he bore me, not only believed all I said, but pitied me. As he now found himself raised to such an eminent degree of prayer, he did not remain very long with me, considering his stay to be a loss of time, and therefore he returned home. Being desirous of spending my time on other vanities, I was little troubled at his departure. But I not only persuaded him, but others also, to apply themselves to prayer, even while I was in the midst of these vanities, as I found them fond of vocal prayer. I told them how to make use of meditation, and gave them books, and did them good, for I still had a desire that others should serve God, even from the time that I began to practice mental prayer, as I before mentioned. It seemed to me, that as I did not serve our Lord so well as I should, I was desirous that the light which His Majesty had bestowed upon me might not be lost, but that others should serve Him by my means. I relate this here to show the great blindness in which I was, which exposed me to the danger of losing myself, while I was endeavouring to do good to others. About this time my father fell ill of the sickness of which he died, and which continued only a few days. I went to attend him, being more sick in my soul than he was in the body, on account of my numerous vanities, though not to such a degree as to think I was in mortal sin, even in the worst time of my wickedness, for certainly if I had thought so, I would never have continued therein. I suffered much during his illness, and I think, in some slight way, I made up for the trouble he took with me when I was ill. Though very unwell then, I endeavoured to assist him all I could, for I reflected how, in losing him, I should lose all my joy and comfort, for in him I placed them. But I animated myself in such a way as not to show him